Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe to the channel to stay updated with our latest stories. The sky was dusky, smeared in shades of burnt orange and ash gray, when Ethan's world fractured. One minute, he was riding shotgun in a military transport, the next, a flash of movement, a screech of tires, metal tearing through metal, then blackness. When he awoke, it wasn't to the familiar din of his base or the voice of a commanding officer. It was to silence, to sterile white walls, and the rhythmic beeping of machines that announced his survival. A nurse's voice, gentle but foreign, told him he'd been unconscious for 5 days.
Frankfurt.
Military hospital. He'd been lucky, she said. But Ethan didn't feel lucky. His body was fractured, ribs broken, limbs immobilized, but the weight on his chest had nothing to do with the crash. Has Clara been here? He rasped. The nurse hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression. She's been informed, but no, she hasn't come. Confusion twisted inside him. Clara hadn't come. Then came the call, the voice of the woman he loved, cracked with sorrow.
Ethan, she's gone.
Amelia, our baby, she didn't make it. And in that moment, the real wreckage began, not of bones, but of trust, truth, and the foundation of his entire world. 2 weeks later, Ethan's body had begun to heal, but his heart remained splintered, hollowed by a grief that felt both suffocating and surreal. The flight back to the U.S. was quiet, save for the drone of engines and the ache of anticipation. When the wheels touched down and the doors opened, he scanned the tarmac until he saw her, Clara. She stood motionless, thinner than he remembered, her arms crossed tightly over her chest like she was holding herself together by sheer will. Their embrace was wordless. Familiar, but fragile. The woman who had once been his home now felt like a stranger clothed in sorrow. At the hospital on base, they sat side by side in sterile rooms filled with soft murmurs and hollow footsteps. Sometimes they talked, but mostly they didn't. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been swallowed by grief. One afternoon, as pale sunlight spilled across the floor, Ethan gathered the courage to ask the question that had haunted him. Did you name her? Clara didn't speak at first. Then, in a voice barely more than breath, she whispered, Amelia.
A Single-Name.
A wave of pain. A burst dam of tears. They cried not just for the daughter they lost, but for everything else that had quietly unraveled between them, the dreams they'd never speak of again, the lullabies that would never be sung, the tiny shoes that would never be worn. That moment didn't mend anything, but it reminded them that, in their shared silence, they were still mourning the same child. It had started with a box. Just an ordinary box tucked beneath layers of linen and half-unpacked winter coats, unearthed while Ethan tried to make their new house feel like home. He hadn't expected much, maybe old photos, postcards, forgotten trinkets from Clara's childhood. But what he found instead stopped his breath cold. A ribbon-wrapped bundle of papers, a folded birth certificate with the name Amelia Grace Sadler, and beneath it, an adoption document that drained the blood from his face. The birth date was the same as the day Clara had told him their daughter was stillborn. But the certificate said otherwise. She had been born alive. Healthy. The father listed as unknown. Ethan's hands trembled as he pieced it together. Amelia hadn't died. She had been given away. Without his name. Without his knowledge. Without his consent. The betrayal was so sharp, it left him breathless. This wasn't a fleeting lie. It was orchestrated. Sealed. Hidden. A secret Clara had buried for years beneath shared grief and quiet embraces. As he stared at the paperwork, rage and sorrow warred within him.
How could she do this?
Why hadn't she told him? The image of the nursery they had decorated flashed in his mind. The tiny clothes they had folded together. The funeral they never held. Ethan sat on the floor, back against the wall, the truth heavy in his lap. The silence of the house no longer felt peaceful, it was deafening. And in that moment, he knew, whatever came next, nothing between them would ever be the same again. Ethan watched Clara move through their home like a ghost wearing her own skin. There was a gentleness to her gestures, a calculated stillness in her voice. She was trying to pretend. To act like nothing had changed. But Ethan couldn't unsee what he had discovered. Every glance she offered felt rehearsed. Every touch, hollow. And yet, he didn't confront her. Not yet. He needed to understand why, to catch her truth, not her lies. So he waited. Watched. Observed how she lingered on her phone a beat too long, how she'd slip away to take calls behind closed doors. He began to track the inconsistencies, a meeting that ended too late, a dinner that never happened, a glance she couldn't quite explain. All of it fed the fire building inside him. Clara had once been his compass, the one person he trusted without hesitation. But now? She was a riddle wrapped in silence. And Ethan was unraveling. One night, while she slept, he sat beside her, watching the way her brow furrowed even in dreams. Did she feel guilty? Did she mourn the daughter she'd given away as he had? Or had she buried that pain beneath new secrets, new betrayals? The weight of the adoption certificate burned in his chest. He didn't know if the woman beside him was still the Clara he'd loved or someone entirely different. What he did know was this: the truth had claws, and it was coming for them both. All he could do now was wait for the moment it tore its way free. The confrontation came not with a scream, but a whisper. Ethan sat across from Clara in the soft glow of their living room, the weight of the documents pressing against his thigh from where they lay hidden in his coat pocket. He watched her, studied the woman he had once built a life with, her fingers curled around a mug of tea, her eyes distant, barely meeting his. "Clara," he began, his voice low but unshaking, "I found the box." Her eyes lifted, just slightly. A flicker of recognition.
The one labeled, Childhood Memories.
Her hand paused mid-air, the mug hovering between them like a fragile truth waiting to shatter. "I found Amelia's birth certificate." A silence fell so thick it stole the breath from the room. Clara's lips parted, but no words came. Ethan pressed on, each word slicing through the fog between them. "You told me she died, Clara. I grieved her. We grieved her. But you gave her away.
Without telling me.
Without even letting me say goodbye." Her face crumbled.
You wäre gone, Ethan.
"You were hurt. I didn't know if you'd make it. I didn't want to burden you with." "She was my daughter too," he interrupted, his voice breaking for the first time. "You didn't just lose Amelia. You erased her from me." Tears welled in her eyes. "I thought I was doing the right thing." Ethan looked away, his chest heaving. "Then why does it feel like everything we built just collapsed in your silence?" Ethan couldn't sleep that night. The shadows on the ceiling danced like ghosts of the life he thought he had, the wife who had lied, the daughter he never got to hold. He stood by the bedroom window, watching the rain streak down the glass, wondering how long Clara had carried this secret. How long had she looked him in the eyes and said, "I love you," with the weight of betrayal buried beneath her breath. The next morning, he drove to the address listed on the adoption papers. He hadn't meant to, but his hands moved before his conscience could stop them. It was a quiet neighborhood, unassuming. A swing set sat in the front yard. And there she was. A little girl with dark hair and the same dimpled smile Ethan had seen in old family photos. Amelia. His Amelia. He didn't get out of the car. He didn't knock. He just sat there, frozen, heart aching, watching the life that could have been his. That should have been his. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, the pain in his chest blooming like wildfire. How could Clara make that choice for him? How could she take something so sacred and offer it to strangers while he was bleeding out on a battlefield, fighting to come home to them? He left without saying a word. But something inside him broke, again. This time, not from war, but from love lost and trust obliterated. And there was no battlefield training that could prepare him for that. Ethan sat on the porch that evening, a storm brewing in the sky and in his chest. The truth weighed heavily on him: Amelia was alive. She was out there, breathing, laughing, growing, and he hadn't even known she existed. Clara's betrayal wasn't just a fracture, it was a shattering. And yet, she moved through their home like nothing had changed, setting the table, folding laundry, pretending the world hadn't tilted. Ethan watched her, searching her face for something, remorse, regret, maybe even guilt, but all he saw was weariness. And perhaps fear. She knew he knew. The silence between them had become a language of its own, punctuated by missed glances and half-swallowed words. That night, over dinner, Ethan finally spoke. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice low and cracking. Clara froze, her fork halfway to her mouth.
Tell you what? She whispered, like a child caught in a lie.
"You know what?" Ethan said, sliding the adoption papers onto the table. Her face went pale. Time seemed to stop. "You don't understand," Clara began, but he cut her off. "Then make me understand, Clara. Make me understand how you buried our daughter while I was fighting for my life." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but Ethan didn't move. Didn't comfort her. Not yet. He needed the truth, not the soft, sugar-coated version. He needed to know why she erased him from the one thing he dreamed of during every sleepless night in the desert. Why she gave their daughter away. Why she never looked back. The house had never felt quieter. Even with the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the hardwood floors, Ethan swore he could hear the echo of his own heartbreak in the silence. After Clara's confession, after the papers and the truth and the unbearable weight of her betrayal, Ethan hadn't said much. He didn't yell. He didn't storm out. He just withdrew. In the mornings, he went for long runs, sometimes not returning for hours. At night, he sat in Amelia's would-be nursery, a room that had been hastily converted into storage, with nothing but a single photo of a hospital tag that bore her name. Amelia. His daughter. His blood. His little girl who had been given away like a secret, like a mistake. Clara tried. She cooked his favorite meals, left notes on the bathroom mirror, even started therapy without him asking. But every kind gesture felt like a bandage over a wound that still bled. Ethan couldn't decide what hurt more, that Clara had lied, or that she had made a choice for both of them and never looked back. Their marriage, once strong and passionate, now existed in fragments, awkward dinners, forced smiles, and the ever-growing silence that pressed on both their chests. And yet, deep down, a question lingered, clawing at Ethan's conscience. If he could forgive her, if he could find it within himself to move forward, was there still a future left to save? Or had love itself been the biggest casualty in Clara's betrayal? Ethan's hands trembled as he held the printed documents again, the adoption papers, the birth certificate, the horrifying truth written in black and white. But what consumed him now wasn't the betrayal. It was the question that had haunted his every waking hour since discovering the truth: who was Amelia's real father? Clara had left the father line blank, legally absolving Ethan of any claim. That choice wasn't just paperwork, it was deliberate. Calculated. And now, in the space left behind, 1,000 possibilities roared. Was it someone she worked with? A stranger? Or worse, someone Ethan knew? He began piecing together timelines, combing through memories with newfound suspicion. The man from her book club who called too often. The co-worker she once dismissed with a casual laugh. The trip she took alone the same month Amelia was born. Everything took on new meaning, every forgotten glance and offhand comment dripping with hidden significance. Ethan spiraled, each revelation stinging sharper than the last. When he finally confronted Clara, her silence was deafening. She didn't deny. She didn't confirm. She just stared at him, eyes wide and glistening, lips trembling with a truth she didn't dare voice. That silence was more damning than any name. The foundation of their marriage had already cracked under the weight of her lies, but now Ethan realized something even more gut-wrenching. He might not just be grieving a lost daughter, he might be grieving a child that was never his at all. And that uncertainty, that hollow space where truth should be, hurt worst of all. Ethan sat in the dim glow of the living room, the adoption papers still folded neatly in his lap, like a loaded gun he wasn't ready to fire. Across from him, Clara paced, nervous, pale, eyes darting anywhere but his. The silence between them had stretched for hours, a chasm growing wider with each unanswered question. But Ethan had reached his breaking point. His voice, when it finally broke the tension, was quiet but deadly calm. Who is he, Clara? The question hovered in the air like a blade, sharp and final. She froze. Her fingers curled into fists, shoulders tightening as though bracing for impact. It doesn't matter, she whispered, but the quiver in her voice betrayed her. It does to me, Ethan snapped, rising from the couch. He matters if you gave my daughter, our daughter, away without telling me. If he's the reason you erased me from her birth certificate. Clara's face crumpled. I was scared, she said. Of you. Of the truth. Of what Amelia would grow up knowing. The name, Amelia, hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. She had named their child alone, made every choice alone, written him out of the most important moment of their lives. You weren't scared, he said coldly. You were selfish. In that moment, Ethan realized the truth. It wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. Clara hadn't just lied, she had rewritten history, carved him out of fatherhood, and now stood there asking for understanding. But all he felt was rage.
And heartbreak.
And loss. Ethan couldn't sleep. The moonlight spilled across the floor of the empty guest room he had claimed, casting shadows that danced with every gust of wind. Clara had cried herself to sleep hours ago in the room down the hall, but her sobs still echoed in his mind like a haunting melody. He stared at the ceiling, reliving every lie, every omission, every shattered dream. His daughter, Amelia, was out there, alive, breathing, growing up in someone else's arms. Not his. He had memorized the lines of her adoption papers, her birth weight, the time of delivery. Facts that should have been etched into his memory from the moment he held her, but he hadn't even known she existed long enough to say goodbye. And yet, even in the chaos, Ethan couldn't shut off the part of him that still loved Clara. That traitorous part that remembered her laughter in the early years, the way she used to reach for his hand during thunderstorms, the way she whispered dreams into his ear before sleep. But love felt like a distant echo now, muffled by betrayal. He needed answers. Not just about Amelia, but about everything. Why she didn't trust him. Why she had rewritten their story without him. Why she had chosen Victor. The next morning, Ethan made a decision. No more avoiding. No more silence. If Clara wouldn't give him the truth willingly, he would seek it out himself. He owed that to himself, and to the daughter he never got the chance to meet. The truth came in fragments, documents tucked inside a file Clara thought she had hidden, names he didn't recognize, dates that didn't add up. Ethan sat at his desk, the edges of his vision blurring with disbelief as he pieced together the mosaic of Clara's secret life. Among the papers was a name, Victor Langston. A man who had once been nothing more than a client of Clara's design firm. But phone records, late-night emails, and travel receipts painted a different story. Victor wasn't just part of Clara's past, he had been with her through the most pivotal moments Ethan had missed. The pieces clicked into place, the secrecy, the tension, the distant looks, and finally, the adoption papers where Victor's name was mentioned in coded language, listed as a personal contact for post-placement communication. Ethan's hands trembled as he set the papers down. He felt hollow, like his entire life had been scripted by someone else, someone who had decided he didn't deserve the truth. The betrayal ran deeper than lies, it was the theft of choice, of fatherhood, of mourning. And still, a small voice inside him whispered, "What will you do with this truth? Revenge?
Confrontation?
Or closure?" Ethan stood, the file still open on the desk. He wasn't sure yet. But what he did know was this: if Amelia was alive, he would find her. Not to disrupt her world, but to reclaim some sliver of the one torn away from him. Even if Clara never understood, Ethan would not live the rest of his life in silence. Ethan stood at the edge of the park, watching families stroll past with laughter and ice cream cones, the sun casting golden shadows across the grass. His heart pounded as he glanced at the photo in his hand, Amelia, age 4, her bright eyes and curly brown hair so achingly familiar. The private investigator had confirmed it. She was here, with her adoptive parents. Ethan hadn't planned on approaching them, just seeing her. Proof that she was real. That everything he had lost wasn't just a painful illusion born from grief and betrayal. And there she was, sitting on a checkered blanket with a couple in their 40s, eating watermelon and giggling as the juice dripped down her chin. Ethan's breath caught. It was like watching a dream unfold, both beautiful and excruciating. He took a step forward, then stopped, torn between the desperate ache to say her name and the solemn promise he'd made to himself not to disrupt her life. He wasn't on her birth certificate. He had no legal rights. He was a ghost to her. A stranger. But he couldn't turn away. Not yet. He memorized her face, the way her hands moved, the pitch of her laughter. And when he finally walked back to his car, tears stinging his eyes, Ethan knew this wasn't the end. She was alive. That mattered. And someday when the time was right, if it ever was, he'd find the courage to tell her the truth. Not to claim her, but to let her know she had always been loved. In today's fast-paced world, it's easy to take love, trust, and connection for granted, until it's too late. Ethan's story is a powerful reminder to never let silence replace communication, and to face discomfort before it becomes regret. Betrayal, secrecy, and avoidance can shatter even the strongest bonds. So if something feels broken in your relationship, speak up. Ask the hard questions.
Tell the truth, even when it hurts.
And if you're grieving, allow yourself space to heal without losing who you are. Life rarely gives second chances, but it always offers the opportunity to choose honesty, courage, and love moving forward.